When Dexter Resurrection was first announced, I was excited. I, like many others, disliked both the ending of the original series and the ending of New Blood. The one thing Resurrection had over New Blood is that it wasn't a miniseries and is expected to last multiple years. With this stipulation, I felt it very likely that we would see a more planned out story that would take its time to develop either its characters or newly introduced plot threads. Instead, what we received were a string of episodes which, one by one, really served to undo themselves and do a disservice to their material by not allowing certain ideas to breathe. With Resurrection, there were parts and pieces that worked for me. I think Harrison is a much more likable character than he was in New Blood. I like the new supporting characters such as Elsa and Blessing. The performances of Michael C. Hall and David Zayas are among some of their strongest work in the franchise. Peter Dinklage's character is probably the best main villain of any season, if not since Trinity, then at least since Isaac Serco. And I really like the contrast that Uma Thurman's Charlie provides as the more serious appearing of the two. The setting of New York is aesthetically appealing and gives the season a distinct flair. I think the problem with this show, if I could boil it down to one thing, is pacing. Many modern writers have this fear of letting things breathe. This has its genesis in the original Dexter, where within 2 episodes of Christine's death, Quinn was banging Deborah, and within 2 episodes of Rita's death, Dexter is hanging out with a new blonde woman who will eventually become his romantic interest. As I sat there rewatching the season in its entirety, I noticed that with the exceptions of the 5th and the 8th episode, almost every single episode has a death. This is not inherently something new to Dexter, as the original show had kills of the week, but with this much shorter season, we're treated to a much tighter narrative, and we have a succession of deaths that actually move the story forward in the first several episodes, and a multitude that are, in my view, holding it back. On a rewatch, I almost get the feeling that the writers were afraid viewers would get bored if someone wasn't dead every 60 minutes. Now, before we begin, I just want to address the fans. There are reasonable fans who may disagree with what I say here and will either present some counterpoint or acknowledge the validity of that claim. But there are some fans who have taken this show, and in glorifying it, they have pushed it to a point of sainthood where they seem to not believe we have the right to criticize it. You have one guy in my comment section claiming that y'all are never happy, in spite of me mentioning in that video and others multiple things that I liked. To people like Buttmuncher45, who scaled a skyscraper with his Michael C. Hall poster, proclaiming that people saying negative things about Dexter Resurrection are trying to take all the romance out of life. I really hope you, the viewer, can appreciate the irony of being labeled toxic or unsatisfiable when not liking a show that only exists because fans complained about the one before it and the one before that. These people have no self-awareness. Let's get started. Episode 1. The comatose Dexter sees visions of Arthur Mitchell and Miguel Prado. Harrison is now working at a hotel, having made a friend in Elsa, who he babysits the son of. Harrison is also friendly with hotel guest Ryan Foster, haunted by his shooting of his father, and meets Iowa native Shauna. Harry reappears as a ghost to Dexter, urging him to be there for Harrison, as does Dokes. Harrison helps Ryan take Shauna up an elevator, and realizing his intent to rape her, attacks and kills him. Harrison returns Shauna to her room, and hides Ryan's body before taking it to the kitchen, where he dismembers it and ultimately discards of his remains when the city's trash collector comes. Dexter struggles to walk as a result of spending 10 weeks in a coma, and is confronted by Teddy, who gives him a note from Angela, and asks him if he wants to press charges on Angela for shooting him. The pieces of Ryan are discovered, and officers Wallace and Oliva arrive to inspect the scene. Dexter is reunited with Batista, who suspects him of being the Bay Harbor Butcher based off what Angela and Maria told him, and reveals that he has legally resurrected him. Dexter learns of Ryan's murder, and concludes it was Harrison after learning the body was cut into 9 pieces. Dexter escapes the hospital, stealing the vehicle of a recently deceased patient. A woman breaks into an apartment of a serial killer to deliver a message. Dexter locates Harrison and observes him from afar. This is a pretty perfect episode. Most first episodes of Dexter seasons, with the exception of probably the 6th, tend to be really good at setting up a premise that the rest of the season will either deliver on, or fail to. It establishes how Dexter survived the shooting, the suspicions that Batista has after his conversations with Angela, what Harrison has been up to in the 10 weeks since he seemingly killed his father, the detective characters of Wallace and Oliva, and the inciting incident of the season with the killing of Ryan Foster, and on a rewatch, the season finale with the incoming gala being mentioned. The conversation between Dexter and Trinity is a real highlight, as the brief appearance by John Lithgow's character serves to remind the viewer that Dexter's desire to kill Trinity himself indirectly led to Rita's death. I especially like the interaction between Dexter and Miguel because of the first 4 seasons, the third tends to be the least referenced, and seeing Miguel get mentioned twice in this show is a nice reminder of him being the first person to know of Dexter's serial killer ways and want in on it. Jack Alcott gives a strong performance throughout. He really captures Harrison's internal struggle about killing his father and wrestling with what to do when he's clued into Ryan's intent to rape Shauna and wrestles with getting involved. I have to remind myself that Harrison only kills one person this entire season, and yet that death kickstarts the plot of the whole season. The shot of him vomiting after disposing of the body is a nice reminder that he doesn't feel the gratification that his father does from committing murders. Batista's reunion with Dexter is a real highlight. I remember the fans that were pissed that we didn't get a reunion between the two during New Blood, in spite of the show's last episode indicating it would happen. And finally having it was nice. You see the sincerity in Batista's hug of Dexter, mentioning of speaking at his funeral of how he lost him, and the gears turning when he mentions being confused after Angela told him of her belief that Dexter was the Bay Harbor Butcher, and Maria mentioned the same thing before her death. There is so much beneath the surface, and I maintain that if David Zayas and Michael C. Hall are not the best actors of the show, they are certainly the ones given the most to work with, at least in these first few episodes. This is probably my favorite scene in the entire season. The brief scene giving us our first glimpse of Charlie is enhanced upon rewatch because it demonstrates her disgust in serial killers and her duties. One minor complaint would be that Batista tells Dexter that LaGuardia told him in confidence that he was the Bay Harbor Butcher. Anyone who bothered to watch the original show knows that LaGuardia came into Miami Metro with a handcuffed Dexter, and only then did Batista learn he was being accused by her. When past events are referred to in ways like this, it can make your revival come off as a thinly disguised reboot set in another universe, because past events that we were there for are now being referred to in ways that do not align with what we saw. I also don't like that the nurse says crazy white men, because that's one of those lines that is not in line with the original Dexter, which was a show that largely abstained from any commentary on race. Like, sure, most serial killers in the US are white, but is that really worth noting when that probably has to do with there being a majority demographic? I will say that I've been frustrated, and I only bring this up because they did it, with the choice of Ghost in the episode. There are fans who argue against Dexter seeing Rita as a ghost because she didn't know who he really was, but you would think if anyone was going to both be someone that knew Dexter's secret identity and also cared immensely for both him and his son, it would be Hannah. I never cared for her as a character, but it makes much more sense to me that the ghost of the woman that raised Harrison for years would be the one to convey how much he needs Dexter, as opposed to the cop who died before Harrison was born. I like Eric King just as much as anyone else, but the usage of him here seems kind of forced. But all in all, this episode really succeeds in setting up the core plots that we'll explore over the next 9 installments. In episode 2, the Dark Passenger attacks Stanley, his corpse being found the following day. Dexter wants to connect with Harrison, but decides he can help him by being smart and practical, infiltrating the hotel, and looking in the room Ryan was murdered in. Dexter observes Wallace's theories on Ryan's killer, and she orders the room under active investigation. Harrison watches Elsa's son, Dante, and Dexter continues looking around. Batista talks with Teddy about his concern for Dexter, and gets Teddy to set up for Batista to be notified if anything happens to Dexter's old pickup truck. Dexter is picked up by rideshare driver Blessing, who informs him of the Dark Passenger. Charlie meets with Keith, the Canton clubber, who she informs is out of the club. Keith pleads and touches her, leading to Charlie killing him. Blessing invites Dexter to his house, where the driver that survived the Dark Passenger will be in attendance, and Harrison offers to let Lance buy his truck. Dexter goes to Blessing's house and meets his family and the Dark Passenger's would-be victim. seeing a video that shows him the camera-shy hoodie that he uses to obscure his face. Blessing suggests Dexter move into his daughter Joy's old living quarters and shows Dexter the basement. Dexter deduces that Ronald Schmidt is the dark passenger's identity and searches for him as Elsa tells Harrison that she wants to get a drink with him as a thank you for watching her son. And Wallace and Oliva spot Harrison as they bring Shauna in for questioning. Dexter finds the dark passenger and follows him on foot as he seeks a ride, though his injuries prevent him from keeping up his pursuit. Another episode where I have very little to criticize, as it continues to build on the plot set up for the first episode in a well-paced manner. I like Blessing, as he and his family are kind of a rarity to the Dexter franchise. Seldom do we have a character happily married with no apparent major issues with their family, and where they act as a supportive unit. Blessing is probably the most important new character out of the protagonist, as he indirectly establishes a new job and home for Dexter. I especially like the dynamic between Harrison, Elsa, and Dante, which reminds me of that between Dexter, Rita, and her children in the early seasons of the original show. The Dark Passenger as a short-term villain works well to give us a straightforward killer who we are excited to see Dexter kill, and even though he only appears twice, his narrative purpose is felt throughout the entire season. On a rewatch, the scene where Blessing's friend mentions that Dexter bears physical similarities to the Dark Passenger is an excellent piece of foreshadowing for Dexter assuming his identity. We're treated to pieces of Batista's search for Dexter and Charlie taking out the trash, and what's so good about these short scenes is that they are again building to something larger than the sum of their parts. I have to say that I did cringe a little toward the end when we get the monologue from Harry about how Dexter put everything at risk to save someone instead of trying to kill someone. I could have sworn that's exactly what Dexter did when he chose Deb over Brian in the first season finale, or when he saved Oakes from the drug traffickers in the second season's Left Turn Ahead. Did the writers not watch their own show? Lines like that are meant to get us to believe Dexter is having some kind of character arc, but that development occurred in the original show. Anything after the fifth season was mostly just him doing the same thing over and over again, which is fine because he's still an interesting character, but let's not pretend that he's still changing. In the third episode, Harrison is interrogated by Wallace, admitting he bought weed for Ryan once, and claiming a night with a woman he can't remember the name of as his alibi. Dexter eats with Blessing's family, his wife Constance revealing that she knows Dexter was from Miami, and mentioning that she paid $75 to a website to get his information. Dexter locates Ronald's apartment and finds out where he's going to be as well as how he's able to hide his face. Batista is called by Teddy, who reveals that Dexter's escape car got a ticket, thereby giving them its location. Wallace and Oliva continue their investigation and discover where the body was dismembered and removed. Dexter watches as Elsa and Harrison meet, the two going back to her apartment where Elsa offers to let Harrison spend the night on her couch. Wallace and Oliva confront Harrison with their theory that he killed Ryan Foster, and Harrison confesses to having lied about his alibi and living at the hotel. Dexter gets his kill tools, and Elsa is interviewed by Wallace and Oliva, assuring them of Harrison being a good guy. Quinn and Masuka confront Batista over his retirement, and he keeps his intentions vague. Elsa confronts Harrison over revealing her role in his living at the hotel. Dexter gives the Dark Passenger a ride and subdues him. Red reveals that he started killing drivers because they hurt his father's business, which led to his suicide. Dexter learns Red was invited to a dinner party for serial killers and decides to pose as him after killing him. The interrogation of Harrison by Wallace is very tension-inducing, and when Harrison said that he had a confession, I really thought he was going to admit that he was the one who did it. I could see a scenario where he gets busted for this one murder, which is ruled justifiable, and then that starts to unravel the secrets his father fought so hard to protect. The return of Quinn and Masuka was nice, given how many people were let down by their not appearing at all in New Blood. I thought this was the only time we would get either of them back, but Quinn has a stronger presence in the show than I would have anticipated, getting referenced in the first episode and either appearing or having lines in 3 others. Why they decided to not have him tag along in New York with Batista, considering that he was the first person from Miami after Dokes to investigate Dexter as a killer, is beyond me. I like the last scene between Harrison and Elsa where she very clearly makes it known that he has threatened her livelihood, and while the scene works in isolation, the next episode has them back to being friends like nothing happened. Someone could argue that she got over it off screen, but why introduce the premise of her being mad at him if you're going to just forget about it the next time we see them? I had a feeling that Red wasn't going to last too long in the series because his type of murder wasn't something they could have going for more than a few episodes, and he had served his narrative purpose of being similar looking enough to Dexter that when the latter poses as him, no one thinks anything is amiss. In the fourth episode, deciding to attend the serial killer meetup as Red, Dexter contemplates his adoption of Red's identity by faking his fingerprint. Quentin's jewelry calls Harrison to tell him that the watch Ryan gave him is ready. Charlie retrieves Dexter and declines to divulge anything about the meeting before they arrive. Dexter is introduced to Leon Prater, a billionaire venture capitalist. Prater takes him to his vault of serial killer memorabilia and shows him materials left over from John Wayne Gacy, Ted Bundy, Charles Manson, Arthur Mitchell, Brian Moser, and the Bay Harbor Butcher. Dexter is introduced to Mia LaPierre, known as Lady Vengeance, a serial killer who takes out sexual predators. He then meets Rapunzel and then Lowell. Batista tries locating the owner of Dexter's old truck and learns it was in Harrison's care when it was sold. Dexter meets Gareth, the Gemini killer, and observes Lowell's preview of his intent to saw off the arm of a tattooed woman. Batista meets with Harrison and plays along with the latter's belief that Dexter is dead, before asking him if he knows anything about his father being the Bay Harbor Butcher. Harrison denies knowing anything, and Batista learns of Ryan's murder after Elsa brings it up upon thinking he was already questioning Harrison over it. Dexter and Mia agree to speak alone as the gathering concludes. Lowell agrees to meet with Dexter and he goes for a run with Mia, who reveals her past. They return to her apartment where she shows him her trophies before going to shower. Dexter leaves to meet with Lowell, who speaks of his intent to murder. Batista goes to meet with Wallace and Oliva, and Dexter captures Lowell before he can get to his target, killing him. Batista meets with Harrison again, who denies involvement in Ryan's killing, but begins feeling guilty. He begins to turn himself in before Dexter, revealing himself to still be alive, stops him. This episode is great. I saw some people saying it was one of the best episodes of the entire franchise, and it's kind of hard for me to disagree. Dexter as a character is someone who has struggled with forming genuine connections with someone, and I can see where he would be attracted to being around other serial killers. Charlie's line that money changes everything is better on a rewatch once the viewer knows her motives for her line of work. I have to say, the scene where Dexter isn't able to get in with Red's fingerprint was probably the one time in the whole season that I worried for Dexter. Not necessarily because I thought he was in danger, but more that his cover could be blown. Prater is inherently interesting as someone that wants to offer a safe space to killers, and as we've been introduced to Charlie now for several episodes, he's established as the overarching villain that we've been building to the first appearance of. The scene where he takes Dexter through his room of serial killer memorabilia provides both a commentary on the real-life glorification of murders and serves to call back to both the Ice Truck and Trinity killers, who are generally considered the best villains of the whole series. Dexter's reaction to seeing his old blood slides and the almost magnetic pull he has when he touches them are conveyed excellently through Michael C. Hall's expressions. Batista's conversations with Harrison are such an interesting contrast between the former friend who now wants to learn the truth about a killer and the murderous son who wants to protect what he believes is his dead dad's reputation and by extension himself. The moments of Batista getting Harrison to recall Jamie brought a smile to me, mainly because it's nice to have some updates on characters even if their last appearance was over a decade ago. In their second conversation, you can really see the angles Batista is employing to get anything out of Harrison, admitting that Ryan was a bad person, appealing to his humanity when he mentions the deaths of LaGuerta, Deb, and Rita. When he later tells him that he hopes he doesn't become like his dad, you can hear the sincerity in his voice, a tinge of regret that the son of his former best friend might fall into the same habits as the man he once trusted. I had no issue with Lowell being taken out as soon as he was because I felt he was probably the most one note of any of the new killers, and having one of them die kickstarts the arc for the remainder of the season, which is whether or not Dexter will be able to kill all the guests without Prater or one of the guests realizing he is responsible. I will say that there is an argument to be made this episode is a little late in terms of the season's pacing. Prater is the main villain of the season, but we're getting him 4 episodes into a 10-episode season. Compare that with Trinity showing up in the first episode of the 4th season of a 12-episode season. Even though it takes several episodes to get to Brian's first physical appearance in the first season, the menace of the Ice Truck Killer is felt from the pilot when they're investigating the pieces of a victim he left behind. At the time, I wasn't entirely sure Prater would be in the show for just one season, which is why I had no complaints. But looking back, it's jarring that it took this long to get to him. and we're going to have about half a dozen episodes to develop him and the different killers. The only other thing I'll point out is that we see Jeffrey Dahmer's fridge in Prater's collection, when in reality the fridge was destroyed 2 years after Dahmer's death. But in total, this episode contains interesting interactions, good visuals, excellent callbacks to earlier parts of the series, and a hell of a cliffhanger. My only regret is that it is all downhill from here. In episode 5, Dexter takes Harrison back to his home after revealing he's still alive to the boy. Harrison reveals that he met with Batista and refuses to let Dexter immediately come back into his life. Prater has an interview with Leslie Stahl, revealing some of his past. Harrison reluctantly agrees to meet with Detective Wallace, and Dexter proposes to Mia that they hang out, going to a bowling alley where they talk about their families. Harrison claims to Wallace that he wanted to get Shauna's number from the department, and Wallace seizes on him using the word guilty to describe his feelings about learning who Ryan was, noting that he may have a hero complex from his behavior in Iron Lake. Wallace wants to discuss Harrison's time in Iron Lake, and when the former refuses to give Harrison her information, the latter learns he is still a suspect and leaves. Prater tells Leslie that both of his parents were killed by a drunk driver. Mia asks Dexter if he wants to go to a wine bar and proposes collaborating on a kill. Blessing argues with his mother Prudence after she falls, and Dexter talks with her, Prudence saying she would rather die in her home. Charlie visits her mother and lies about both being a teacher and having a student read a book to class. Dexter calls Harrison, and the latter says that he cannot help him with the ongoing Ryan Foster investigation. At the bar, Mia tells Dexter that anyone he wants to kill will do, revealing that she just enjoys killing. After Dexter declines to do a kill with her, Mia tells Dexter of her intent to kill someone alone. Dexter observes Mia getting ready to torture and kill a man in her apartment and calls the police. They arrive before Mia can kill the man, and she is arrested. The officers finding she has a trophy of Ryan Foster. Harrison quickly deduces that Dexter set Mia up and visits him, Dexter recalling the circumstances of Rita's death and the two appearing to reconcile. Charlie visits Mia in jail and the latter admits her mistake, Charlie promising to make Mia's time in prison as short as possible. This is the episode where things start to go off the rails. The first, the second, the third, and especially the fourth, I will maintain, are mostly good. The scenes of Dexter and Harrison are the highlight of the episode. Harrison's reaction to finding out his dad is still alive is well acted, and Michael C. Hall does a good job conveying Dexter's desire to reconnect with his son. There is a shared longing to have whatever little family they have left, but I can't help but ask the question, where the hell are Aster and Cody? The more seasons of this show, the more it tries to convey the importance of whatever little family Dexter and Harrison have left, the more I'm left confused and baffled by their absences. Like, do they just not exist anymore? The interrogation scene with Harrison and Wallace offers nice callbacks to the events of New Blood, which mostly go unreferenced throughout the entire season. Mia was introduced as someone who only kills sexual predators, and I found this idea interesting because it's not unrealistic to me that of all the various serial killers either active in this show, New Blood, or the original series, there could be someone out there who, like the Bay Harbor Butcher, is intent on punishing only those that they deem to deserve it based off of their own corruption of the justice system. When Mia is revealed to just be another killer, it makes her character much less interesting and much more one note. It also reveals that the only reason for her inclusion in this story was to serve as a red herring for the New York police and get them off of Harrison's back. This is even more annoying when you consider that since the police believe Lady Vengeance to only kill predators, the same effect could have been achieved without writing Mia out of the story as quickly as they did. We could have had Mia and Dexter come to some understanding that his son is in trouble, and her willingly giving some DNA sample, or maybe even making an untraceable call to lead the NYPD to think she's the killer instead of Harrison. This is the first of several times in the season that the show will have an idea I think is really interesting and just balled up, throw it away. And again, Harrison being willing to start anew with Dexter made for some nice scenes, but wouldn't it have felt more earned if we get this gradual reveal to Harrison of Dexter's hidden hand support, where he learns episode after episode that it was his father who cleaned up after him, who arranged for Mia to take the fall for his killing, and who has been solely concerned with making sure he's able to live a normal life. When you introduce a premise that could set up something different or interesting, and then reveal that it isn't that way. You invite someone to consider that you've made your story worse on purpose. The fundamental problem of this season is that it has enough plots and characters for multiple seasons that are forcefully crammed into one. In the 6th episode, Dexter is sweeping outside when Blessing announces to him that his mother has passed. Dexter, wanting to attend her wake, tells Harrison of the death, and the latter supplies him with the suit. The two attend the funeral together as Charlie searches through Red's apartment and notes his absence to Prater. After speaking at Prudence's funeral, Dexter receives a call from Prater, who reveals he's outside his apartment, and Dexter tells him he is never going back there as he prioritizes his own safety. Prater tells him to come to his place as soon as possible, and Harrison agrees to watch Dante when called by Elsa. Wallace and Oliva interview Mia's would-be victim, and Batista tells the pair of his theory that Harrison killed Ryan Foster, getting Wallace to consent to letting him tag along for their incoming interview with Mia. Gemini, Rapunzel, and Dexter meet with Prater, and Gemini states his worry that Mia will snitch on him. Charlie meets with a man about a favor, and Dexter follows Gemini to a bookstore where he leaves a note before Dexter takes it. Elsa mentions the black mold they found in Dante's bedroom closet, and of her landlord ignoring her calls. Gemini reveals himself in Dexter's apartment, inquiring why he took his note. Dexter feigns being a fan and offers him a drink, which Gemini switches before drinking and passing out. Dexter kills Gemini and is intruded upon by Blessing, who confesses to him that he was a child soldier and that his mother saved his life. Dexter's meeting with Harrison is interrupted by Charlie calling for the former to meet with Prater. Wallace, Oliva, and Batista arrive at the prison right before Mia is found dead in her cell from an apparent suicide. Dexter arrives to Prater's aircraft, getting on board with Al before Gareth arrives, revealing the Gemini killer is a pair of twins. The scenes at the start of Prudence's funeral are a nice reminder of the Season 5 opener My Bad, and gives us our first glimpse of Dexter and Harrison working together as a family unit. I like the section on the Bay Harbor Butcher in the serial killer book that Dexter reads, as serial killers are known to be into materials about themselves, and seeing a Dokes photo continues to show the legacy of his framing in the 2nd season. Getting to see a more vulnerable side of Blessing was unexpected, as his outburst at his daughter's fiancé was so unlike his more friendly and outgoing demeanor. Harrison's interactions with Dante and Elsa are nice, and when we get the imagery of him stabbing the landlord, I really thought he had attacked the man before they revealed it was just a thought. Just because Jack Alcott does such a good job displaying the righteous anger that Harrison feels over the landlord's refusal to do anything about the mold. I'll butcher his name, but I really like David Dasmalchian as Gareth. He has a very arrogant yet formal way to him. You get the sense this is someone who believes his own hype, and you could argue him getting killed by Dexter is a result of his own hubris. I will say, here we are, just 2 episodes removed from the one that introduced us to Prater's group of serial killers, and we've already lost 3 of them just a little over the halfway point of the season. The scene where Blessing talks of his mother's role in saving his life is genuinely heartfelt. I would go as far as to say it's his actor's best scene in the entire season, because through his facial expressions, you can see this mix of emotions between sadness, relief, and anger as he recounts his past. I think it might be the only time while I watched this show that I actually got teary-eyed, because it reminded me of the role my grandparents played in my life and the emptiness that I have felt and continue to feel. The scene toward the end of Dexter and Harrison talking of the latter's impulses are well done. The mentioning of Deb being so fitting that I could almost picture her sitting there with them. You know, when Mia was arrested, I was under the impression that having her in prison would at least give one of the killers from Prater's group the chance to come back in a later part of the story. Her death is just a confirmation that they will introduce a character who has something interesting about them and then completely strip them of all those elements so that they can write them out as quickly as possible. Wouldn't it have been more interesting after going to jail and being interviewed by Batista? She plays coy about whether she ever met Dexter in exchange for some potential benefits to her sentence, and we get a few episodes or so of her adding tension on whether she'll confirm who he is and have this get back to Prater and Charlie. The reveal of Gemini being twins was something I did not expect, but was pleasantly surprised by, because I thought this was setting up an opportunity for more with Gareth. Oh, how wrong I was. In the 7th episode, Prater, Charlie, Dexter, Al, and Gareth arrive at the former's castle, where he informs them of Mia's death. Harrison hangs out with Elsa, and Al shows the group a video of him murdering a woman. Dexter talks about what it's like to be a killer, and Batista casts doubts on Mia's suicide not being a homicide. Prater tells Dexter of his parents' killer, Cooper Morris, and shows him the first letter that the killer wrote to him. Batista meets with Blessing, confirming Dexter's residence. Dexter sits by Gemini and tells him he knows he has a twin. After initially denying, Gemini begins opening up before Dexter reveals he killed his brother, and Gemini attacks him. Dexter killing him and lying to Prater and the others that Gemini intended to kill the other killers. Harrison meets Gigi on the Collins College of Criminology campus and walks into a lecture Wallace gives on the New York Ripper. Dexter arrives there and the two listen to a lecture together before Dexter tells Wallace that Batista spiraled after finding out James Dokes was the Bay Harbor Butcher and suggests to her the possible murder weapon the Ripper uses. Dexter returns to his home and finds Batista hanging out with Blessing and his family. Dexter offers Batista a ride back and warns him to stay away from him, Harrison, and his family, something Batista is unwilling to do as he wants to get payback towards Dexter for the deaths of LaGuerta, Deb, and Dokes. Dexter lets Batista out of his car, but not before the latter is able to put some AirPods in the car so he can track him. The scenes at Prater's mansion are fun. The video of Al's murder is stunningly realistic and really makes the character scarier because we show that in spite of his very friendly outward appearance, he has a tactical mind which allowed him to formulate the plan of posing as being injured to lure this unsuspecting female hiker to try helping him just to be rewarded with being murdered. The scene between Dexter and Harry might be one of my favorite of James Remar's scenes in the season because we get a mention of the difference between him and the other killers and the reference to Harry's suicide. It's the first time in his exchanges with Dexter that you can really see the latter's frustration with this moral conscience ghost of his. It is rare to see Dexter be able, even while still posing as someone else, to talk about what being a killer is like. Prater's backstory, the most we've learned of the character's history up to that point, is also a nice reveal that certainly makes his fascination with serial killers have a deeper meaning than just being a sick guy coddling society's worst members. The scene where Dexter sits with Gareth is a masterstroke in the slow burn. You see Garrett's initial denials of what we as the viewer know is the truth, his acceptance to mention some of his secret to him, and the sheer terror in his eyes as he realizes that probably the only person in the world who understands him and that he cares about was killed by the man talking to him. Brian's mention serves a nice callback to the first season's finale's idea of brother killers. Now that I've praised this scene, let's rip apart how it rushes through another plot thread. The revelation that Gemini was a twin was one I was very open to, and the expectation I had from this plot twist was that it was going to be some attempt by the writers to give a notorious serial killer someone who is concerned about him, notices his absence, and traces it back to Dexter. It was my hope that we could get perhaps a few episodes of this other Gemini killer putting the pieces together and how things started going downhill once Dexter appeared, and maybe before that divulging some aspects of his past to give us some ideas of how these two elusive brothers were able to convince the whole world except one man how they were the same person. Instead, he is taken out one episode after his brother, right after discovering the truth. This is another instance of that same rushed storytelling that started in the 5th episode. My mind is in pretzels because I can't understand the point of having the Gemini killer be a pair of twins if you're going to get rid of both of them back to back. Was this twist just there to surprise us at the end of the other episode, fuel a bunch of stupid fan theories, and give another body for Dexter to add to his kill count? There was a guy who came in my comment section and said that it made sense for Dexter to be taking them all out so easily because he's been killing for 30 years, and I have two retorts. One, the show explicitly tells us that Gemini is on the FBI's most wanted list, and in the 9th episode, Harrison will remark with shock that Dexter killed him. So this is not me personally thinking that Gemini should be a threat, but rather the show hyping him up before it quickly dispatches of him. 2, how are we supposed to take anything seriously when we can't feel like a single antagonist other than maybe Charlie is an actual threat to Dexter? When you make your villains look like jokes, then why should I care about any of this? I like the exchange between Dexter, Harrison, and Wallace. It's hard to believe this is the only time Dexter and Wallace interact, and that one scene is very significant as he plants the seeds for what will eventually be Batista's downfall. The scenes between Dexter and Batista are probably the best parts of the last 3 episodes because they capture that tension laying under the surface that was present in their exchange from the first episode. Batista and his interactions with Blessing, both while Dexter is not around and when he meets him again, have so much under them, and this innuendo. The exchange in the car where Dexter warns him that things won't end well for him if he is who he thinks he is. And the look on the latter's face are phenomenal. What I was hoping for, with the revelation that Batista now knew where Dexter lived, was a return to the antagonism that Dokes provided Dexter during the 2nd season of the original show. How exciting would it have been for maybe a scene or two throughout the rest of the season and most of the next where Batista cozies up to Blessing and his family and is sometimes there without Dexter even realizing. It would constantly have the latter on edge about what's he saying to them, as you have to remember that very little of Dexter's past has been explicitly stated by him to Blessing or his family. How intense would it be for Dexter to just casually be talking to Blessing about the loss of his mother, and he relates it to Deb's death, a person and passing he only knows about because Batista told him. In the 8th episode, Batista records himself in his hotel room as he notes his intention to log places Dexter spends significant amounts of time in. Dexter calls Al and learns of his intention to leave for Wisconsin early, the former suggesting they meet after he sees Hamilton and Al agrees. Prater sets up the gala and is met by Charlie, who mentions that she does not have a good feeling about Red. Elsa's issues with her landlord continue, and Wallace looks into Miami's cases before Oliva comes in with his tux for the gala. Dexter unintentionally reveals to Joy that her father was a child soldier, leaving her distraught. Harrison calls Dexter and tells him of Elsa's situation, Dexter deciding to get involved and learning that Al is leaving early over the phone. Dexter is chewed out by Blessing, goes to see Vinny. Harrison meets with Gigi to tell her he's applying, and she proposes they go out together. Dexter captures Vinny, and Batista travels to the wig shop he set up. Batista breaks into the wig shop, and Dexter releases Vinny, who rushes past Batista as Dexter flees into his car. Dexter finds Batista's AirPods and destroys them. Wallace calls Miami Metro and speaks to Quinn, who confirms that Batista is no longer captain. Dexter and Harrison eat together, and the latter asks if he can stay with him for the weekend before Prater walks in on the pair. I'm very happy that Al survived. Had they killed him off this episode, it would have been 3 consecutive episodes of members of Prater's meetings being taken out by Dexter. I'm very intrigued by Al as the one killer who seemingly has managed to lead a normal, happy family life, and keeping him around sets up the possibility of further exploration. I was initially fine with the scene between Dexter and Blessing because you could tell how upset the latter is, but knowing how the rest of the season goes, it's just artificial tension that really is just there to pad out the last few episodes instead of adding anything to the story. It kind of reminds me of Elsa getting mad at Harrison in the 3rd episode for revealing that she helps him to stay in the hotel, and then that plot getting dropped in the exact next episode. The part where Batista walks in on Dexter's torturing of Vinny and nearly catches him is good, but the rest of it falls apart. I'd like to think that if I'm trying to catch a serial killer and I run into his would-be victim, I would ask for their name. I'd like to think if I'm trying to catch a serial killer and I find the location of his intended kill, I would try to secure the perimeter, make sure he can't get away before I get in there. And maybe someone in the comment section can enlighten me here, but why can't Batista just catch the fleeing on foot Vinny and ask him who he is? Does Vinny possess super speed? Does partial nudity make him faster? Dexter finding the AirPods and destroying them is really frustrating because, again, it's another one of those plot developments that is taken care of almost as soon as it's introduced, in the same vein as Mia being a regular old killer and Gemini being a pair of twins that are going to be killed within 24 hours of each other. How interesting would it have been to have Dexter either going to Prater's place, something related to Harrison, etc., and the whole time you're seeing Batista making note of it, keeping track of him. When you consider that episode 9 is going to reveal that Batista still knows where Dexter is anyway, him finding and destroying the AirPods is an even stupider plot development. Sincerely, what is the point of Gigi? If you wanted to have a new love interest for Harrison, why introduce her so late into the season? Think about every love interest for either Dexter or Deb in the original series. From Rita in the 1st season, Lundy and Lila in the 2nd, Quinn in the 3rd, Lumen in the 5th, Hannah in the 7th, and even Angela and New Blood, they're always introduced in the first several episodes of the season because writers in the past knew that if they wanted to properly develop a relationship, they should get the introduction of the love interest out of the way as soon as possible so more time can be spent showing them bonding or getting closer to whoever the subject of their affections will be. There are people who theorize that Gigi was going to have some bigger role as the daughter of the New York Ripper or some connection to a larger plot thread, but I don't understand the point of introducing a new recurring character in a season with just 4 episodes left. You know, I'd like to think, as we enter the last few hours of the season, we get a consistent focus on Dexter, Harrison, Prater, Batista, Wallace, Oliva, and Elsa, because we've been building up their respective stories since the season began. By the way, Elsa just stops existing after this episode, which pisses me off because I found the single mother aspect of her character interesting, and I think having her and Harrison get together, or at the very least be close friends, would feel much more organic and earned than Harrison and Gigi banging after their second meeting. The episode ends with Prater finding out that Dexter has a son, similar to Trinity discovering his true identity, even if the former isn't to the same extent. The reason this is supposed to be a big deal is because not only does it heighten the danger of Dexter and Harrison, but it also throws the safety of their loved ones into contention. Is Charlie going to go after Elsa, Blessing, or the latter's family to get to Dexter or Harrison? Just keep this in mind as we proceed. In the 9th episode, Prater introduces himself to Harrison, learning the latter's name before Dexter takes him outside. The two agree that Harrison is off limits, and the Morgans leave the diner while being trailed by Batista. Charlie interrogates Harrison for information on Dexter, and Dexter is able to persuade Blessing to pick up Harrison after work. Batista meets with Wallace and Oliva, the former revealing that she has learned from Quinn that he is retired and warning him to leave New York by the next day or face being arrested. He is also ordered to turn in his shield. Batista goes to Prater's residence to try warning him about Dexter, but is met with resistance from Prater's bodyguards, only to be given audience with Prater after Charlie intercepts him. Batista reveals his connection to Dexter as well as his real identity, and Dexter goes to see Prater, who discloses that he now knows who he is as he leads him to the tied-up Batista in the vault. Prater offers to become Dexter's benefactor in his quest to kill serial killers if he kills Batista. Dexter frees Batista, hoping they can team up against Prater, but his former friend chokes him and is shot repeatedly by Prater, who flees the room with Charlie. Dexter tries to make amends with Batista before he dies, but Batista curses his name as he passes away. I think this is one of the worst episodes in the whole franchise. It has its highlights. The opening conversation between Dexter and Prater is filled with tension. The scenes of Dexter catching Harrison up on Prater's actual activities while they're being followed by someone is alluring, and the scenes with Charlie give her some much needed character development after she's mostly just been Prater's lackey. By having her do something that she doesn't want to do simply to save her mother, it gives her a complexity that anyone who has ever had a loved one that they couldn't live without, as I have, can understand. Why would Batista think Dexter is planning to kill Prater? Remember, we as the audience know about Prater's dinners and his fascination with serial killers, but Batista does not. Batista knows Dexter's MO of only killing other killers, which could explain why he doesn't rat him out to Blessing and his family, but then I'm left with the same question of why is Batista so determined to confront and help Prater after seeing him talking with Dexter. The final sequence of the episode where Prater reveals to Dexter that he now knows who he actually is had me on the edge of my seat, but what came after that had me rolling my eyes. Prater knows that the Bay Harbor Butcher only kills serial killers, so why the hell would he think he's going to kill not only an innocent, but someone who had previously been his friend? This kind of stuff is supposed to be tense, but it doesn't make any sense. Batista's death is stupid from both how it plays out and also narratively. I've seen people who are saying it's in character for him to ignore that there is an armed serial killer lover right behind him as he tries to strangle the serial killer, and I don't buy it. I don't think any sane person would get strapped to a table to be stabbed, fed by the person who was supposed to kill them, and then attack that person instead of the one holding a weapon, who set them up in that situation. Now, I mentioned earlier that Resurrection is supposed to be multiple seasons. I cannot understand, nor will I ever, the logic of spending a whole season building up the rivalry between Dexter and Batista just to kill off the latter either so soon or at all. There is no character they could introduce or bring back that would carry any of the narrative weight in trying to capture Dexter that Batista does. He is the closest thing we have ever come to having a character trying to expose Dexter that we actually like. The thing about New Blood is that, aside from pretending that Dexter never felt love before Harrison, it really doesn't mess up the original show at all. Part of that is because it features minimal involvement from any of the original series characters besides Dexter and Ghost Deb. So even if that crappy ending had been the proper conclusion, at least Batista, Masuka, Quinn, everyone else in Miami got to live on and seemingly have a happy conclusion. Now when I rewatch the original Dexter, I'm going to know that Batista is going to die getting shot in the back by some random serial killer lover who he only knew for a few hours, who he ironically had set out to save because he thought Dexter was trying to kill him. No good deed goes unpunished. By giving an original series character such a crappy fate, it retroactively worsens the original show because it feeds into this idea that if you are a normal person who tries to expose Dexter like an actual cop will do, you're going to die, while Dexter lives on season after season because Showtime will never stop wanting to milk this IP. This episode basically makes Resurrection to Dexter what the sequel trilogy of Star Wars is to the original trilogy. Hey, remember that happy ending? Time to override that. A lot of us feel like Dokes was killed off too soon, but at least the writers had enough sense to leave him alive for a few episodes after finding out the truth. Meaningful episodes that revealed the real reason Harry died and gave Dexter a moral dilemma that many of us to this day think we were robbed of getting a proper conclusion to. With Batista, there's no conversation, there's nothing. A release, a chokehold, and a shooting. Not to mention that Dokes' death came after 2 seasons of antagonism that kept building up until reaching that boiling point of him finding out the truth. We have had 3 scenes of Dexter and Batista interacting. The few minutes in the first episode, the 3 minutes in the 7th episode, and the 2 minutes in this one. Throughout the entire season, and this is supposed to make for a good rivalry, for a fitting conclusion to a relationship that has been there since the show started in 2006. This episode is so bad that it single-handedly manifested this video. If this episode had ended with Dexter and Batista teaming up and Prater locking them in the vault, I wouldn't have made my rant video and thereafter expressed my grievances with the various creative decisions made throughout the season. If this episode ended with Dexter being trapped in the vault after Prater used Batista to find out who he really was, and then threw a living Batista injured somewhere and the latter had to work with Harrison to free Dexter from the crazy serial killer connoisseur, I wouldn't have made my rant video. This episode was the writers saying to me that I need to have some major plot twist at the end of every episode, and we will absolutely sacrifice one of the series' best characters and further damage the potential longevity of this show, just to keep that artificial adrenaline running. In episode 10, Prater, after having locked Dexter inside the vault, tells Charlie of his intent to leave Dexter there until he dies. Dexter calls Harrison with Batista's phone, and he comes to find the vault his father is locked in before encountering Charlie. Dexter threatens to release the files Prater has on her if she doesn't let him go, and Charlie agrees to releasing him as a favor for him not killing her mother, with the stipulation that she'll kill Harrison if he releases the files later. Harrison gets the code for the vault's door and Dexter is released. Charlie confronts Prater to announce she's done protecting him as Dexter searches for the thumbprints. Charlie telling Prater that she's both going to disappear and have Prater continue paying for her mother's medical bills. Dexter finds the thumbprint on Batista's corpse. Prater locates Harrison and holds him at gunpoint as the two return to his vault, the latter calling Dexter, who offers his life to Prater in exchange for his son, before Prater declines to leave a witness. Harrison hits Prater with the tranquilizer, and Dexter orders him away. Prater begs for his life, even offering to pay for Harrison's college, but Dexter refuses and kills him before he activates the alarm. The officers come into the vault and find Batista's body, deducing that Prater killed him and took off. Dexter sails away with Prater's body. This episode was leaked online in Russian right around when the previous one came out, and normally I wouldn't want to watch something in a language I don't understand, but because I just wanted to be done with this show, I watched it before waiting for the English release the following week. I still was going to watch it again in English just so I could know what was going on. Admittedly, it's not as bad as the previous episode, and unlike that one, doesn't have a scene that makes me sick to my stomach. Prater's reaction to becoming a killer is well acted by Dinklage. The Brian cameo was nice and serves a solid bookend to Dexter's first time in the vault when he saw his kill table. People speculated from the time the show started that Brian was going to appear based off some of the stuff that Christian Camargo was doing on social media. The proposition that Charlie gives Dexter is among Uma Thurman's strongest performances as a character, and you really get the sense that she's in control. I'm very happy that they didn't kill her off because one, she's morally gray, and two, there's always the possibility of bringing her back in some capacity to service a later story. The conversation between Dexter and Prater before the latter is killed is an interesting dialogue where Dexter contrasts their past as having made them into the men they are, and you can really see how Prater believes he's going to survive if he just bribes Dexter enough. You really get the sense that money has solved every problem for him up until now. The main issue for me with this last 40 plus minutes of the season is that it doesn't really have any tension. There's the whole sequence of getting the correct password for the door and all those guns being pointed, sure. But does anyone really believe that after 10 seasons, Dexter is going to either die in the vault or be discovered as a serial killer by the public at large? Does anyone really believe that Harrison is going to either get shot by Charlie or by Prater when he uses him as bait? Notice the complete absence of any of the supporting cast and how this episode's protagonists are just the Morgans and the police officer duo of Wallace and Oliva. And it really shows you how almost anything having to do with other characters this season was a waste of time, as they don't factor into this story, the final one of the season, at all. I think it would have been tension-inducing to have Prater or Charlie hold either Blessing, Elsa, or Gigi hostage to extract things of Dexter or Harrison, and then see either or both of that duo have to explain away why this person they're close with had a gun pointed to their face. Holding one of those three hostages at least gives Prater or Charlie a target that we could believe could actually die, that we could be persuaded would either be failed by Dexter or Harrison. The most disliked season finales are the ones for the 6th season, the 8th season, and New Blood. I'm not here to defend any of those, but think about every single season finale of Dexter up to this point, and how many of them would have so many main characters, the ones who appear in every episode, their actor's name is in the credits, just uninvolved. If you told me when this season started that Elsa and Blessing would not be in the final episode with the exception of a cameo for the latter, I would have said you were nuts. Their absence makes this expansion of Dexter, a season that introduced so many characters and lore, feel kind of empty. I can't help but feel that if Batista was kept alive and was in the vault with Dexter having to work with him, and he was the one that Prater put the gun to the head of, it would have felt much more concerning that he could die because so many fans had convinced themselves that that was going to happen this season. So even if you were someone who supported or was fine with Batista dying, him getting killed in the actual season finale instead of the second to last episode would have been more tension-inducing instead of, hey, let's keep threatening the two characters that we will never kill off unless we don't get renewed. Excuse my language, but the show basically blew its load before the climax instead of during, leaving the last episode kind of hollow. Dexter Resurrection is a show with a lot of promise, excellent acting, and many interesting ideas, but it is also a show with lousy pacing and rushed executions. It is a show that with its 10 episodes may have realized that it possibly bit on more than it could chew, more than its runtime could justify, but instead of working around this by possibly just telling a somewhat satisfying story in the first season that could be followed up if they're renewed, they instead crammed everything into this pretty small number of installments. And while some things were able to be presented fairly well, such as Harrison's evolving relationship with his father, Charlie's espionage and motivations for working with Prater, and Prater's fascination and control of serial killers, the resolutions to everything else just were undercooked. I believe the serial killer dinner story, which debuted with enormous potential, was let down by only having 6 episodes to work with, and the writers seemingly being hell-bent on trying to squeeze every idea, every conflict, and every conclusion into what used to be only half a standard Dexter season. A lot of people were saying that this was one of the best seasons of Dexter in the entire franchise. I would put it in the bottom 3. It's not as bad as seasons 6 or 8, but did I walk out of this season feeling in any way either satisfied with the story told or excited for what was to come? Absolutely not. They canceled Original Sin, and while I join a majority of fans in having wanted that show to continue, if Resurrection were canceled in its place, I would prefer that, because my excitement for any further plot developments is gone. Like, after blowing through so much material in its first season, what could they possibly do in a second season to warrant my interest? Are they going to have someone threaten Harrison again? Are they going to have Quinn come to New York so he can trail Dexter and die to avoid exposing him so the writers can get away with doing the same thing for the fourth time? Are we going to get some weird love triangle between Harrison, Elsa, and Gigi? Will Blessing reveal another thing about his past to Dexter for him to accidentally reveal to his daughter and start another subplot that goes nowhere? This is not an awful show, but neither is it a very good one. And it's sad because I was optimistic about it when it was first announced. When the first couple of episodes came out, but piece by piece, they unraveled my support until there was nothing left. The only solace I take away from either shows or movies that go in a direction I don't agree with is that I can apply lessons when I write my own stories of what not to do. And I wanted nothing more than to not be part of a minority of people who walked away from this show with the sour taste in their mouth. But I'm not going to pretend I like something because other people do. I think my critiques have been very thorough, very fair, and very constructive. Do with them what you will.